There's something nobody warns you about. The moment you stop trying to be understood by everyone, something strange happens. The people who were never really in your corner quietly disappear. And the ones who stay, they stay differently, more honestly, more completely. Most of us spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, running a silent campaign for our own approval. Not our approval, theirs. Whoever they happen to be at any given moment. A parent, a boss, a stranger on the internet, someone who probably hasn't thought about you since Tuesday. And the exhausting part isn't the effort itself. It's that we've been trained to call it ambition, to call it caring, to frame the weight we carry as evidence that we take life seriously. But what if it isn't? What if the weight isn't wisdom? It's just weight. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that the individual who has ceased to be ashamed of himself has also ceased to be afraid. Think about what that actually means. Not shamelessness, not recklessness, but the quiet disappearance of the need to explain your existence to people who are never really listening. That's what this is about, not how to care less, but how to care better. How to stop bleeding energy into the wrong places and start showing up fully in the ones that actually matter. The hidden cost of constant availability. Here's a question most people never stop to ask. Where did your day actually go? Not the calendar version, not the meetings and the tasks. The real version, where did your attention, your focus, your emotional reserves actually end up? For most people, honest reflection reveals something uncomfortable. A significant portion of their inner life is spent managing other people's perceptions of them, rehearsing responses, replaying conversations, pre-explaining decisions that haven't even been made yet. Psychologists sometimes call this self-monitoring, the constant scanning of the social environment for signals about how you're being received. And in small doses, it's functional. It helps us navigate relationships. But when it becomes the background noise of your entire day, when the question, what will they think, precedes nearly every choice, something has gone wrong. You've stopped living your life and started performing it. The philosopher Epictetus identified this clearly centuries ago. There are things within our control and things outside it. And the root of nearly all human suffering, he argued, is the habit of treating the second category as if it belongs to the first. Other people's opinions, their moods, their interpretations of your intentions. None of these are yours to manage. And yet we spend enormous energy trying. What you get in return isn't security. It's depletion. A slow, steady drain that's hard to name because it never announces itself dramatically. It just shows up as vague tiredness, as the feeling that something's off, as the gap between who you are when no one's watching and who you become the moment someone is. That gap is worth paying attention to, because its size tells you exactly how much of yourself you've agreed to put on hold. What not caring actually means. There's a version of not caring that looks like withdrawal, coldness, indifference. The person who's been hurt so many times they've simply switched off. That's not what we're talking about. True detachment, the kind that actually creates freedom, is closer to the opposite. It's not the absence of feeling. It's the refusal to let feelings become chains. The Stoics had a concept for this, the discipline of assent. The idea that between any event and your response to it, there is a gap. And in that gap lives your actual freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, not immunity from disappointment, but the freedom to choose what you do with what you feel. Most of us never inhabit that gap. We collapse it. Something happens and the reaction is immediate, habitual, automatic. Someone criticizes us, and within seconds we're either defending ourselves loudly or quietly dismantling our own self-worth. Someone ignores us, and we fill the silence with a story, usually the least generous story available. Learning not to care in the real sense means learning to pause before you fill that gap. To ask, is this reaction mine or is it just old programming running on autopilot? Because a lot of what we call caring, the worry, the over-explaining, the need for constant validation, isn't actually love or responsibility. It's anxiety in a costume. It's fear that has learned to disguise itself as conscientiousness. And when you begin to see through the costume, something shifts. You don't become colder. You become calmer. You don't love people less. You stop needing them to perform for you in order to feel okay about yourself. That's freedom, not the freedom from caring, the freedom to choose what's actually worth your care. Think about the people in your life who carry the most weight in a room. Not the loudest, not the most insistent. The ones who seem settled, who aren't scanning the environment for approval signals because they've already made peace with their own uncertainty. What makes them magnetic isn't dominance, it's the absence of desperation. There's a psychological principle behind this. When we're in a state of wanting, needing something from someone, needing a situation to go a certain way, we transmit that need. People feel it. Not always consciously, but they feel it. And it creates a subtle repulsion, the same way a hand grasping at water only pushes it further away. But the person who's genuinely present, not performing, not strategizing, just actually there, creates a different field entirely. Their attention is a gift rather than a transaction. And that changes everything about how people respond to them. This is why the advice, just be confident, is so frustratingly useless. Real confidence doesn't come from telling yourself you're enough. It comes from genuinely ceasing to require proof that you are. The ancient Taoists described this as wu wei, action that arises not from effort but from alignment. The master calligrapher who doesn't force the brush. The skilled negotiator who doesn't push, who listens so deeply that the right response simply emerges. The athlete who stops trying to be great and just plays. In every case, the paradox is the same. The moment you stop forcing the outcome improves. Not because the universe rewards passivity, but because when you're not consumed by the need to control, you become available. Available to notice, to respond, to be genuinely present with what's actually happening instead of what you're afraid might happen. The manipulation game and how to leave it. Here's something that's uncomfortable to say, but worth saying. Most social environments, workplaces, families, friendships, relationships, contain some version of the same dynamic. Someone's reactivity becomes a lever, and anyone who knows how to pull it gains a kind of low-level control over them. This isn't always conscious. Most people who press your buttons aren't thinking strategically. They're just doing what works. They've learned through experience that a certain behavior from them produces a certain response from you. And so the pattern continues, not because anyone designed it, but because it's never been interrupted. The interruption is simple, though not easy. Stop being predictable, not in a game-playing way, not as a tactic to manipulate others in return, but simply because the version of you that reacts the same way every time is a smaller version of yourself, a version that's been shaped by accumulated history rather than present choice. When you stop being predictable, you stop being a reliable lever. And that does something interesting. It forces the people around you to actually see you, not the role they've cast you in, not the function you have been serving, you. Some people won't like that. They'll call it change. They'll call it distance. They'll accuse you of being different. And they'll be right, but not in the way they mean. You're not different. You're simply less managed, less performed, more honest. And the people who respond to that with openness, those are the relationships worth keeping. Solitude as a skill, not a symptom. There's a fear that lives beneath most of our compulsive doing. It's the fear of what we'll find if we stop. If we stop performing, will there be anything there? If we stop optimizing, will we still be valuable? If we sit in silence without immediately reaching for a phone or a task or a conversation, what actually remains? Most people never find out, because the discomfort of that question is precisely what drives the constant activity. But here's what's waiting on the other side, not emptiness, clarity. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote that all of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He meant it as a lament, but there's a path forward buried in it. The willingness to sit quietly without agenda, without performance, without needing the moment to be productive. That's not weakness. That's one of the hardest things a person can learn to do. And it's in those moments, genuinely quiet moments, not distraction masquerading as rest, that something reorganizes. The noise settles. The things that felt urgent reveal themselves as optional. The things you've been carrying reveal themselves as borrowed weight. Other people's expectations, inherited assumptions, fears you adopted without choosing. Solitude done consciously isn't isolation. It's the practice of coming home to yourself. And the person who can do that, who can be genuinely at ease in their own company, doesn't need the world to constantly confirm their value. They already know it, not as a performance, as a fact. What letting go actually builds. There's a misconception worth naming directly, that letting go means accepting less, that if you stop chasing, you'll end up with nothing, that if you stop performing, no one will choose you, that the hunger and the effort and the constant forward pressure that are what's making things happen. And without them, everything stops. But watch closely what actually happens when people genuinely let go. Not the theatrical version, not the person who announces they no longer care and proceeds to care enormously about being seen as someone who doesn't care. The real version, the person who, after years of striving in a particular direction, genuinely releases their grip on a specific outcome. What almost always follows is not collapse. It's a movement, often the very movement they were trying to force, because the energy that was locked up in managing, in anticipating, in defending, that energy becomes available for something else, for noticing, for creating, for connecting in ways that aren't transactional. The relationships that form from that place are different. They aren't held together by need or performance or the fear of what would happen if one person stopped trying. They're held together by genuine presence. The work that comes from that place is different, not less effortful, often more so, but the effort arises from engagement rather than anxiety, from interest rather than fear of failure. And the life that comes from that place feels different. Not easier, not without difficulty, but honest, recognizably yours. So here's the question worth sitting with, not as a concept, but as something real. What are you spending yourself on that no longer belongs to you? Not the work, not the relationships, not the things that genuinely matter. The other thing, the invisible tax you've been paying to other people's opinions, to old stories about who you have to be, to fears that have long outlived the situations that created them. Because the version of you that exists underneath all of that, the one that isn't performing, isn't proving, isn't managing, that version isn't something you have to construct. It's something you have to stop obscuring. Nietzsche was right. The person who has ceased to be ashamed has ceased to be afraid. Not because they've conquered fear, but because they've stopped feeding it with the only currency it accepts, the belief that other people's approval determines your worth. The moment you withdraw that currency, genuinely not as a strategy, but as a truth you have actually arrived at, something shifts. You don't become someone else. You become more completely yourself. And it turns out that's the thing that was worth becoming all along. If this hit home, drop free in the comments. And if you found value here, like and subscribe. More is coming that you won't want to miss.